I suppose you have a blank screen now. Am I correct?
No, I see the same screen that the three tiers.
Okay. All right. Okay, so let's continue.
Sure.
All right, so when you go on to the smart view, this is the best example I can give you where the TCP/IP connection is established between the database and the client, or basically the super users. So they go to the Excel, and then they go to smart view, and then they will go into the connections. They'll connect to the server using the user ID and password for the for the super user. Basically, they'll select what database do they need to connect to. If they're having more than one database access, more than one application, let's say you are taking care of the whole profit and loss application, and as well as there is a reporting application in ASL. So you'll have two connections listed out there. So you select whatever the connections you want to select to, and then you connect. Now, this is an arrangement which happens through the TCP/IP. So the client directly communicates with the database server. There is no involvement of HTTP here. So this is a TCP/IP connection. Okay, this is a very simple example. Now let's say you also talked about you go on to the outline, you do your basics through the EAS console, whatever you want to. Now, how are you going to EAS console? You basically have a link which has a port, which has the user ID and password. So you enter the user ID and password, you see the outline, you do whatever you want to as an administrator or the super user, whatever it is. Now, how are you communicating with the database here? You're not directly communicating with the database. There is a how do I say? There is an interface which allows you through the web to the database. But this arrangement all happens through HTTP.
Okay.
Now, to name a few services which are very, very important, the consoles. There is one administrator service console, which is EAS console. And then there is, when you basically launch this EAS console, right in the beginning, it says that, it's connecting to the Java. Yeah. Now this Java is the how do I say, the backbone. Now without this, you can't have the console open. So this also involves the HTTP or HTTP server. That's one of the consoles which you internally launch. Okay, and then there is integration services, which are basically the Windows service, which communicate between the database and the client. Okay, altogether you need everything here. Without the HTTP server, without the TCP/IP connection, the things can't happen. You can control the database. You can still access the database through the HTTP server, but for you to access Smart View, you definitely need the TCP/IP connection.
Okay.
Yeah. So there are few more applications which need the direct TCP/IP connection with the server. A lot more. Now, there is let me quickly show you the services which are involved. Okay. Let me share everything actually. Okay. Hope you're able to look at my screen.
Yeah.
There are going to be lots of Oracle services when you are working on Oracle Hyperion, or the planning, or the airspace. Okay, now the reason is you need a schema to have the airspace. How do I explain it? Okay. All right. Now, in the background, what really happens is the S-base is on the top of RDBMS server. That's what this picture explains here. Okay, where is it? Now you look at this. There is RDBMS on the right-hand side, and then there are another OLAP metadata catalogs, basically. But let's not worry about the OLAP metadata at the moment. Let's worry about this RDBMS. Now, this database TR is on the top of the RDBMS. Now, you cannot have this database without the RDBMS database. Now, what it basically does is you'll have a schema. I hope you understand what a schema is, right? Yeah, the schema is basically in a very layman technology, it's the user. It's a user. It's a very simple user, but however, this user has to have a few how do I say, attributes. Yeah, attributes is a good way to explain this. Now, when I say attributes, it's the attributes are in the terminology against RDBMS, not the terminology against S-base. The attribute has a different terminology in S-base. So let's not consider the S-base terminology. Here we are talking about the RDBMS terminology. So a user basically has a cursor value. A user basically has table space. So when I say table space, it's basically the space which is allocated to this user on the RDBMS server. Okay, so that you can define it. Basically, you can churn it accordingly. No, for S-base, basically, I'm just giving you an example. For S-base, whatever schema you're going to use from the RDBMS server, that schema should have unlimited space, unlimited table space. That's because you may run out of the space if you have some space allocated to that schema. You don't want that. You don't want your S-base to have a limited space. That's why you allocate unlimited table space for that schema. You know what I mean? basically when you create a schema, it's created as a default schema. It will have its own values against, with its own normal values against that schema. I don't really remember what is the table space value. However, when you create this schema, you change the rights of that particular schema to whatever is required for Essbase. One of the examples is table space. So the schema, when you create a schema, it has some space, let's say some 100 GB, for example. When you create a normal schema, 100 GB of table space is allocated for this particular user, let's say. Now you don't want that, so you change it. There are lots of other attributes which you change when you create a schema. Okay, so the reason why I went in there is you need to have RDBMS server, then you need to have a schema. Now, when you have, let's say you have Essbase, which is the base, without that there is no other component which will work. You need to have this. And then let's say there is planning, okay, one of the components which you have installed, which you are going to install on the server. Let's say this is the requirement. You don't require any other component, but at the moment, let's just consider the Essbase and planning, for example. So how this works is first you configure the whole RDBMS on your server, and then on top of it, you install Essbase. You configure the Essbase. Now, before you install the Essbase or configure the Essbase, you create a schema, you allocate whatever the resources you want to for that schema, and you are going to use this schema for Essbase. You may have, you know about system as a schema, right? System is a schema in RDBMS. And then there is a schema which is, I don't remember, sysdba, yeah, something like that. That's a default schema created as well. But you don't use those schemas. You create a new schema just for the sake of Essbase. Now, let's say you settle down with RDBMS and then Essbase. Now you want planning. Now the planning component goes on the top of the database tier.
Okay.
This is really important for you to understand. Every component goes on the top of the database tier. When I say the database tier, it's on the Essbase. Okay.
What is the difference between RDBMS source and database tier?
Okay, so it's virtual. When I say virtual, the source is the RDBMS, because when you're creating a schema and when you are installing the Essbase on the schema of the RDBMS, basically all the data is finally stored in the source, which is the RDBMS. But when you're accessing it through the consoles, it pulls the data from the source, which is basically the RDBMS server. That's why you need RDBMS. Configuring this Essbase, I talked about the schema, right? Now, all the, I cannot say tables here because tables is RDBMS stuff, but I talk about outline. Internally, when you store the data, okay, it's stored in the form of tables again. Internally, because the virtual concept is the how do I say? The virtual concept is the OLAP, okay? But let's say the requirement is very simple. The MDX, which we call MDX. What this MDX is basically, you're loading the data, okay, from the transactional databases. Okay, that's how it is working. You'll have JD Edwards, you'll have lots of servers, okay, from where the transactions are loaded. They are moved into some text file, whatever it is, weekly, daily, whatever the requirement is. Let's pick a daily requirement. Every day, day one finished, they export the data into a file and you load it on the Essbase. That's what you're doing. Now, what if you don't use a flat file? You want to extract the data, whatever the transactional data is, from an RDBMS server directly. Okay, now that's when the MDX come into picture. You write lots of queries. You connect to that particular RDBMS server, and then you'll write lots of queries to extract the data and push it, basically. Okay. Now that's one of the beautiful resource, MDX, through which you don't have to really do a flat file loading or any sort of loading. It's directly connected to the RDBMS, and you can just load the data. The reason why we are loading the data, it's very simple. Again, on the transactional databases, you can work on Excels. They become two-dimensional, and then you will have to pull lots of pivots, and then you work on the pivots. From one pivot, you need another few pivots. It's possible, but however, you'll have lots of sheets, lots of background work to understand the whole process, and you can't really look at the facts or look at the history in a simplest way. That's why we have this OLAP. So you forget that two-dimensional and you go into this spreadsheet, which is again a spreadsheet, which is Excel, but here you'll have POVs, which is just like a drop down or a smart list, where you'll have to pick from whatever the combination you want to look at the data. Okay. In another way, how I could relate this OLAP with RDBMS is, it's very simple. Someone who knows how to create tables, who understands what are the tables necessary to have your metadata stored on the RDBMS. Someone who has a little knowledge of this will be a very good functional guy. Reason being, you would understand, okay, now I need a table which is only dedicated for the products. Okay. And then he understands what is the dependency. He can, let me break it down in a very simple way. Okay. Let's say there are like thousands of rows when a transaction happens. Correct. Now, there is either a transaction done, there is a transaction which is cancelled or not done. It's simple. That's the rule of atomicity. You do none or you do full. There is no halfway transaction. Okay, that's called the rule of atomicity in databases. I'm taking you through a long view. Okay, so just be a little patient here unless you come to a point. Okay, now what RDBMS does is it breaks down your transaction. Basically, it either does full or it doesn't do anything. There is no halfway. So let's say the transaction is completed. You got a new lineup of products, okay, and then you have a, let's assume there is a product table. Now this product table has the product ID, whatever the ID is, whenever a new product comes in, and then it has a product name, and then it will have its own price, and it has whatever the attributes which come along with the product. It has a color, it has a model, whatever it is. Okay, there are like 10 attributes for this product, let's say. Now, when a product comes in, the company might have not decided with the selling price. It came in, okay, it's in the warehouse, they manufactured it, they do not have it in the database here. Okay, that's what the scenario we are looking at. Okay, or the better scenario is employee. Okay, let's say a new employee came in and he is not allocated any department yet. It just happens, right? He gets into the organization the very first day. He doesn't know which department he is allocated to. He doesn't have lots of things which are allocated to him. So this is the best example. Now, let's say there is an employee, and this employee has a lots of attributes which are department he is assigned, and the list goes on. Okay. Technically, if you look at this scenario, you have an employee in your organization, and let's say you have a table with all the other attributes. RDBMS doesn't allow you to just have an employee in there. You cannot just enter the employee ID and the employee name and leave the other attributes empty or without value. It doesn't. Now, is your RDBMS database up to date is the question. Technically, it doesn't allow you to enter just the name and the ID. However, you already have an employee in your organization. Is it up to date? No. So the functional guys need to understand this. If I have this table, if I'm working around with this table on my RDBMS server, there is a dependency. The dependency is this guy, if he has to go into the database, he needs all these attributes. But since I don't get to have these attributes in hand on the very first day, I will not be able to add him in the database. So that's not the right thing. So what he does is he opens up another table, which he keeps it just for the employee information. He doesn't have all the other attributes attached to it. Just the user ID and the employee ID and the employee name. Just one dedicated table for the employee. Yeah, you know what I mean? Now, this is the architecture which happens on the RDBMS. Now, this is not the case in the Essbase. You will not have these kind of cases, because when you are loading the data on the Essbase, it comes through the whole combination. It cannot drop out any of the combination. When I say combination, hope you understand the terminology.
I
It's
think I get it.
basically, yeah,
Saying,
it's basically the metadata.
yeah, so it's basically when I pull something from Essbase, right? It's whatever, if I have 8 dimensions, it's the intersection of the 8 dimensions. So you're basically saying when I pull something from SmartView, it's the data is stored at that intersection, and you can only, unless you put in all the dimensions, you won't see the data.
Absolutely. When I say you don't see the data, that's because it's not there. As simple as that.
Right.
You cannot have the data loaded into the Essbase if you don't have the whole intersection or the combination.
Yep.
So what we need to understand here is, for us to get that combination, for the guy who is a techie guy who is writing the MDX queries to load the data, he has to be very smart to write queries and subqueries just to get that combination. He cannot just end up writing one small query to load the data into the Essbase database. There's going to be a lot behind that. That's why MDX is very, very complicated. For someone who is loading the data from the RDBMS servers directly, he has to be a very smart developer. And I think the scenario is very rare, because as a base, RDBMS server is used for in a very low, how do I say, the vision is higher or bigger actually. You don't have everything in the RDBMS servers. You'll have lots of other servers. So, but yes, there are situations where you write MDX queries. So
a quick
that's,
question.
yeah.
So you write MDX queries to pull the data out of the RDBMS server, or to kind of dictate how the data should flow into the RDBMS server?
No, you will only go to MDX when you are loading the data, or you could say, in your terminology, dictate,
Okay.
if the data is coming out of the RDBMS server.
I lost you for a second. So let's say we have SAP, right? SAP or JD Edwards, right?
Mm-hmm.
So actual data, right? Let's say a product, profit center, product,
Yeah.
whatever. So it comes from JD Edwards and it gets loaded. And my question is, does it get loaded to the RDBMS server via an MDX query, or you use these MDX scripts to create, like once the data has already gone into the RDBMS server, you write MDX queries to pull it, according to whatever you want, like ad hoc queries?
Okay, so two scenarios. There are two ways to do this. You have all the data from SAP or JD Edwards loaded in a flat file, and then you have the mechanism of rules files in Essbase through which you load the data. One way of doing it.
And we load to the database server or the RDBMS server?
No, the database server directly.
Directly to the database server. Okay.
Yeah. So here you don't need RDBMS. There's no picture.
Okay.
But when you are connecting to a RDBMS source, then you write MDX queries.
So what would be an example of why would a company have RDBMS server? Like, if let's say most companies have like, you know, transactional systems like SAP or Edwards? Why can't they put everything in database server? Why do they need this RDBMS server?
The requirement depends. Let's say if it is, let's say the employee base is on the RDBMS, okay, and the other application, I mean, all the data, which is transactions, are coming out of different servers, but they have something on the RDBMS. That's when the RDBMS comes into picture. The whole idea of MDX is connecting to the RDBMS directly instead of the rules files or the flat files.
So sorry, going back to your example, you said there are two cases. One is like loading directly to the database server, and you were about to explain the other one.
Yeah, the other one is you take the MDX queries. Okay, there are two ways: MDX and rule files. Okay, rules files for loading the data out of the text files or the Excel file, whatever is shared from the different servers.
Okay.
Okay. Now, so we are not talking about RDBMS at all here.
Okay.
Let's say there is data residing on the RDBMS server. One of the examples. Then you write MDX queries to extract the data from there.
Okay. And the reason you write MDX queries is to create ad hoc queries yourself, or you're saying the piece I'm confused a little bit is, you know, it looks RDBMS like data, right? So are you saying if you don't write any MDX queries, I can't do any smart view analysis? I can't pull anything in Essbase?
No.
MDX is purely for ad hoc queries.
MDX is, when I say queries, I think I know where you're confused now. Okay, when I say queries, okay, let's pick a simple example. Okay, I don't know if it's relevant, but I'll try to make it as relevant as possible. Let's say the whole environment, RDBMS is a transactional database, correct? Agree with me?
Yeah.
Okay, so let's forget about JD Edwards, let's forget about SAP. Let's pick an example where the company works on RDBMS as a transactional database. Okay, now all the data is stored in the RDBMS, right?
Okay, yeah.
So there is a way to export this data into Excel files for the reporting purpose.
Right.
Let's forget about that piece too.
Right, okay.
Now, the only piece which we are concerned about is we just have the RDBMS server or the database, whatever it is. Now, there is a way to connect your Essbase to the RDBMS server directly.
Okay.
Okay, what you do is, since you're talking to the RDBMS server here, and let's say you want to load the data on your Essbase to do some analysis. Okay. Now your Essbase has a outline. The data has, when you're loading the data into this Essbase, it has to go through that combination.
Correct.
But your RDBMS has a different architecture, basically a different setup of tables.
Right.
The integration may differ. Now, what I wanted to tell you was, whoever is loading the data through that RDBMS server into my Essbase, he has to be very smart enough to pick and load that data in that combination. Now that may involve one simple query with only one table, or it might involve tens of 12s or whatever the tables are required, just to make sure that the combination goes through.
Okay, got it. And that thing is what you're referring to as writing an MDX query.
Absolutely.
Okay.
You don't have to do all this when you have the data shared with you on Excel. When you don't have to do this when you have all the data shared with you on flat file, which is just a notepad where all the data is dumped. You don't have to do this.
So yeah, I see what you mean. So in your previous example, you were saying, product ID, name, price, color. If it's all, if I can write one simple query from RDBMS to pull those 4 fields and load it to my Essbase dimensions, you're saying that's like the simplest case. But if there's something else to pull in price or something from another table in the RDBMS, then you need to combine all. I mean, to come up with those.
So let's say you want, let's say you are loading the data, a simple transaction which happened yesterday, which is which goes into the sales account, which goes on a particular date, which goes into a particular version, which goes into a particular scenario, which is actuals, because that happened on the RDBMS server, and then the product, whatever the combination of product it is, okay, and then what else? Year,
price, color.
Yeah, price, color. Again, I don't want to go into that deep at the moment. Let's forget it's just a simple product. So I at least have six combinations, I could say. Yeah. So, but if you look at these 6 combinations in the RDBMS server, you will have a different table for accounts.
Correct.
You'll have a different table for product. You'll have a different table to maintain. You don't need to maintain if data is if this data is actual, because it's actual. So it's very understood. So when you're loading it, you write an MDX query saying that it's actual. And then you also don't need version, basically, to understand if it is a top-down approach or a bottom-up approach, which we'll talk in the later stages. Okay, so, but I mean, being a developer, you have to know that what are the tables, where are you pulling the data from to get to that combination. That's what I was trying to tell you.
No, I think it's more clear now. And what is the normal in normal companies? Do they have database servers and RDBMS, or it depends from industry to industry? Or like if you were to assign a percentage, like most of the Essbase applications around the world are around 60% use RDBMS or 70% or.
You can answer. You can answer this question by yourself. The answer is very simple. 99% of the times.
They use RDBMS?
No.
Oh.
They have SAP. They have JD Edwards.
Right.
Yeah. So, but there are certain times where you need to connect to the RDBMS server.
So you're saying, so let's say very simple, cookie cutter installation. SAP comes. So you're saying all the flat files, you just load it to Essbase, and then through rules, and then you just and the data is automatically at that intersection of 8 dimensions or 9 dimensions.
Right. Now, this is a very good understanding you have now at this point in the very first class.
Right. Okay.
Now, while we are here, let me talk about one more thing, which will make your idea very clear. We talked about a simple RDBMS, which is already Oracle product, okay? And then we talked about integrating it, writing multiple queries. Okay, getting the data from 10, 12 different tables.
Right.
Agree? Now, consider that on SAP or consider that on JD Edwards, how those systems work. They might also have lots of objects, different objects,
Mm-hmm.
which is holding the data. Now, the part which you should be concerned about is, am I been given the file or not? Rather than how are they getting the data? Who is doing this or how are they doing it? So our job starts if I have been shared with the file which was supposed to get in here by 7 a.m. in the morning. Is this file available or not? Did my Essbase logic, did my Essbase automatic schedule was done successfully or not? Is my Essbase up to date or not? Because my customer is going to log in today. He wants to look at the history or he wants to look at the data at this intersection. Is my database up to date or not? This is what you need to be concerned of. They will give you the flat files. They will share the Excel files, whoever is responsible from those application teams or from those production management teams or from those database teams. They will share it in whatever the location you want those files to be there. Now you will write Maxell scripts. Basically, Maxell is what integrates your local data, which is on your server, to the Essbase. Okay, this is what you use to integrate these files, and then you load the data. You basically, again, set up these files in such a way that they talk to the Essbase, and the data is loaded across all the outlines. You set it up using the rules files. Okay, and then you write in Maxell script saying that this file, you'll have to load the data from this file into this Essbase, whatever the combination is, using this rule file. That's what you do. I'll break it up into small pieces for you. Hopefully, I mean, do you want me to, or does it make sense to you at the moment?
The Maxell, maybe we can cover, you can break it up a little later, as you see fit.
Yeah, but what I'm trying to say is, it's very simple. You have the file, you're ready with the file, but can you load this file directly into the Essbase? No, because your Essbase it has to be, the data has to be loaded in a certain fashion. Okay, it has to go through all the combinations basically. Okay, now the data which is given to you may or may not be provided in that combination. It may have the column which is missing, which is like actual, because they treat all the data as actual. But your Essbase doesn't know if it is actual or if it is budget or whatever it is. So you need to set that up. That setting is done through the rules files. When you are setting up the rules files and you're doing the data field mapping, and then you load it. Now you can load it manually, but if you don't want to do it manually, you want to schedule it, you will write a Maxell script, and then on the top of the Maxell script, you will schedule it using the Windows scheduler or whatever it is, so that it's done automatically every day.
Okay, got it.
Yeah, that's the whole thing which happens in the background.
Mhm.
Or let's say something fails, you also have the provision
Right.
to have that looked right into your mobile. If something fails, you get a notification on your mobile saying that okay, this has failed, or something is not something has failed. You know, the alert mechanism. That's how
Right.
the alert mechanism is managed, so that
Right.
you can have a quick control over the stuff. Now, this is all done by these admin guys.
Right.
Okay, yeah.
Okay.
So that's about the data load and how you communicate with RDBMS servers, how you communicate with the other servers.
Mhm.
What is the terminology between TCP/IP and HTTP? Why do you need HTTP? Why TCP/IP? Okay, why Java? Now, I opened this. We just deviated from this when we were talking about the services. Let me explain you very quickly. Okay, this service, whichever is highlighted, I think you're able to look at my screen, right?
Yep.
This OPM, this OPMN actually, okay? Now this service is a very crucial service, very important service. In addition to that, you will have OHS instance. You will have another service for your studio, Essbase Studio, and then you will have one of the services for your Java.
Okay.
Okay. Now, 1, 2, 3. Now, let's say you have a studio open, which is another console, and then you have this uh, Java. Okay, and then your OHS. What this OPMN does is it makes sure that the handshake is always on. These three dedicated services, the OPMN service makes sure that are they active or not.
Okay.
If someone goes down, it tries to establish the connection again.
Mhm.
As long as there is not a technical issue or technical challenge, it tries to keep them active.
Mhm.
If something really is down, it cannot control it, right? So
Mhm.
that's when the handshake finishes, and then the connections are lost, everything else goes down. So this is a very, very crucial service.
Okay.
Okay, you just have to remember that.
Right.
Uh, Apart from that, yeah, you don't really have to. Basically, you go into the services part when you, I'm sorry, when you when you're shutting down the service for maintenance,
Right.
and then you will have your whatever activity which was supposed to go on the production service. Let's say there was a requirement, you fulfill the requirement on the development, and then you test it on the test, and then you uh, finally get it approved, and then you put it on the production service. You need to go. I mean, you need to have them down. That's when a scheduled maintenance window is open. You do it in your scheduled maintenance time. During those hours, you basically turn the services down, and then you do your activity, and then you restart it. That's when these services come into picture. Otherwise, you just need to know what is what. That's all. So that's pretty much about the architecture.
Okay.
Uh, yeah, you just go through it whenever you get some time. Probably
Sure.
you'll come up with some questions. and then we can talk about it.
Okay.
You will definitely have questions. Yeah.
So are you sending this? Is that this,
Recording?
are you sending this PowerPoint or?
You want me to? Yeah, I can send it right away to you. Up to you.
Sure. Let me type my email address.
Sure.
So normally we do for an hour, right? Or I'm not familiar. What's the normal? You take it for class for an hour every day, or like that, or?
It's up to you and me. Sometimes if I have to rush away and if I think, okay, it's going over the top now, I'll stop.
Right. Okay. So should we, for day one, should we stop today?
I think we can stop here.
Okay.
I think we can. Yeah, just go through this. This really helps. You shared the email, did you?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I typed it in the box.
No problem.
And okay, so are we doing tomorrow night, 10 o'clock, or?
Tomorrow, yeah, same time, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that should be fine.
So, and then I'm very flexible too, so I'm not like, so if you're going for the weekend or something, if you're not available, that's fine. We can always catch up later. So.
No problem, man. No problem. Let's just start. Then
Yeah.
what basically has to, what I believe in is, yeah. I mean, you can extend, you can drop in anytime, as is feasible, and I can also let you in with the times whatever I could, if we
Sure.
can catch up. Now,
Right.
but for that I mean, if we do a rigorous 5 days, then you will be able to, then it's a piece of cake after that.
Sure. Okay.
Yeah, because if we tend to lose the grip in the
Right.
starting, then it takes, for me, it takes another few hours to catch up on everything else.
Sure.
And for you as well, you wouldn't really feel like, okay, where am I going? So
I agree. You should strike when the iron is hot.
yeah, I mean, initially, yes. Then once you get to understand, what it is like, then for a guy like you, I wouldn't really think it would take a large amount of time to keep you understanding, keep you explaining. I mean, you did a really good job, if I say. For whatever we discussed today, I don't really get that amount of, what do I say, exposure.
Sure.
Yeah. I mean, I've trained people. Someone who doesn't come from this background, it takes
Mhm.
more than a couple of hours to explain them what the architecture is.
Right. Yeah, I have some familiarity.
Yeah, that's really helping.
And I try to, focus on like the big, more important things. And if
Yeah,
there are 10 things, 8 might be less important, 2 might be more important. So.
yeah. I mean, for me also, I shouldn't feel like, okay, if I talk about this, is he going to understand? Rather than, I start the topic and say, okay, yes, I'll he can understand. Let me also target on this. Let me also include this for a better understanding.
No. It's the way, I mean, the feedback, the first hour was very helpful, Mohammed. I was able to,
Yeah.
I took some notes as well as you were talking, and, hopefully that'll,
Yeah.
like you said, first few days should, help us at least put the foundation, and then should be.
Yeah. Sure.
So I think your day has started, right? ending and for you it's starting.
Yeah, I don't usually wake up this early, but it's good. I wake up early and then I have a couple of more hours on my day.
Right. Sorry, I wish I could extend the time, but it's
No, no,
11
no, no,
o'clock.
no,
I have
not
to go.
necessary at all.
Yeah,
Not necessary at all.
awesome.
I'll
Thank you
let
so
you know.
much. So
Yeah,
we will catch up tomorrow at say 10 o'clock.
sure. Same time.
Yeah. Have a nice day.
And you have a good sleep. Take care of
Thank you.
yourself.
Take care. Bye.
Yeah, cheers. Bye bye.